Greetings, science fiction and fantasy enthusiasts. Do you read books? Do you watch films? Do you hate deodorant? Then welcome to our podcast. You're listening to No Deodorant in Outer Space with Ryan Sean O'Reilly. Now, let's get started.
I still can't really realize. I have to stop myself from rushing back, but you saved my life. I know that. The first trip in, I got a paper. I saw where they bombed the Apostle Islands refuge. And it had about these 3 women stealing the Air Force plane and bombing Dallas, too. Of course they shot them down. Over the Gulf. Isn't it strange how we do nothing? Just get killed by 1s and 2s? Or more? Now they've started on the refugees. Like hypnotized rabbits. We're a toothless race. Do you know, I never said we, meaning women, before. We was always me and Alan, and Amy, of course. Being killed selectively encourages group identification. You see how sane-headed I am? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of No Deodorant in Outer Space. My name is Ryan Sean O'Reilly, and I'll be taking you along this apocryphal, apocalyptic, dystopian adventure ride. I am joined here once again for another episode, or not once again, I'm joined here with 2 new guests joining me here. First we have Amanda Andros.
Hello, how are you?
We're doing good, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Glad to be here.
Good. Amanda, just to introduce you to our crowd here at No Deodorant in Outer Space, can you give us a little background on any books or movies that you're interested in, or favorite authors or directors, with especially any science fiction, fantasy, or horror?
You know, growing up, I loved Aldous Huxley.
Mm-hmm.
I studied Brave New World. Mm-hmm. I love Soylent Green, both the film edition and also Rachel Carlson's novels. I grew up with that in high school as well. Mm-hmm. I also love Flannery O'Connor. She's Southern Gothic. Mm-hmm. She focuses on the horror of humanity and the bizarreness of human behavior. I like the psychological a lot. I love Hitchcock.
Oh, yeah,
I think Hitchcock is the master of suspense and horror.
Did you ever like Twilight Zone?
I love Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
I loved it as a series, and after I'd watch the series, sometimes I'd read the novels or the little short stories they were based on.
A lot of them were based on short stories. Actually, I just recorded a podcast earlier for this season on Charles Beaumont, who wrote a lot of episodes.
Yep.
He wrote the short stories that they were based on, and then he worked on the TV show with Rod Serling. So Twilight Zone. Yeah.
And I loved, the Alien series.
Sure.
Stephen King.
Yeah.
He's a master.
He's very popular.
Very popular. And just really, I grew up a lot with Star Trek. The old version of Star Trek.
The original series, yeah.
The original and the 80s version. Even Star Trek movies.
Okay.
So I'm into space a lot and sci-fi that way. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, welcome aboard.
Good to be here.
And also joining us is Erika Doyle.
Hello.
Hello, Erika. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
So why don't you also tell our audience a little bit about yourself as far as books and movies, many authors or directors that you like, and, especially science fiction, fantasy, or horror, but whatever else you like.
Okay. To be honest with you, I'm not a big fan, or I'm not really inclined to read or watch movies that are horror movies or fiction, sci-fi. Mm-hmm. But thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I hope I can fulfill somehow, your listeners.
I suspect you will.
And but yeah, it was a challenge, not a challenging, but it was something that took me out of my
comfort zone.
Kind of, yeah. To read this short story, and it's very interesting. Maybe I wasn't, when I read an author, I read it because I like it, I enjoy it, and I'm not thinking about the genre.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Specifically. So, but we were talking prior to the recording, and some names came up, and you were like, oh, actually, she or he is right sci-fi. Like I mentioned Margaret Atwood.
Yeah. Handmaid's Tale. Yeah.
Yeah. Then Hess.
Herman Hess.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Aldous Huxley.
Yeah.
And then whom else I have? Then I'm more into some magical realism.
Yeah, that's kind of related. Yeah. Actually, I would say that is related. We did a work a couple years ago called Horns by Joe Hill, who's Stephen King's son, and that's like a magical realism one. Your husband Your husband is John Doyle, who's been on the podcast.
I believe so, yeah.
Numerous times. Doyle, he also has done our theme music, so that's some context for you.
Yeah. So then, Stephen King.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Obviously, he's sci-fi, horror, and
he's done fantasy, too. He's done a lot of
fantasy,
different stuff.
Yes. And then I come more from a background of Latin American authors, because I happen to be from that area in the planet. And I enjoy reading the Colombian writer Marquez, and then Alejo Carpentier, he's a Cuban writer. Then Arenas, Reinaldo Arenas, and there are so many other names that cannot come up now. But
well, yeah, your bookshelf is right next to us. You're a prolific reader. You like to read poetry and books, and you are a big reader too, as well, Amanda.
I taught English in high school.
Oh.
To high schoolers, and I was an English major. My mom was an English teacher. I was a voracious reader growing up.
Yeah.
And I love writing as well.
Yeah.
So I enjoy the artistry of literary discussion.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, and the pathos of literature. And my books are all over my house. I mean, you have, when you read, they end up in piles, and
that's what happens when you're a book lover.
Exactly.
We're surrounded by books. There's some on the table behind Erika. She's got a basket of books next to her.
And my family members and my husband, they all want to get rid of my books.
And you're going to keep them.
I hope.
Yes.
They allow me.
So actually, and Erika's from Argentina originally. You're actually the second Argentinian on this podcast. We had Andreas.
Oh.
He was on the Twilight Zone episode.
That's kind of
earlier.
discouraging. I thought I was just the only one in the first one. Okay.
But this is the first time we're going to have two women on the podcast. You're not the first women on the podcast, but it's the first time the women outnumber the men.
This is revolution.
It's revolutionary.
Yes.
Yes. This episode, I haven't said what we're doing yet, but we are going to be covering a short story by the author James Tiptree Jr. The story is called The Screwfly Solution, and we're also going to be covering a film adaptation called The Screwfly Solution, which was an episode of a anthology TV series that aired on Showtime in the mid-2000s, I believe. And this was just one episode that was directed by Joe Dante and starred Jason Priestley from Beverly Hills 90210. Were you guys fans of Beverly Hills when you were growing up? Beverly Hills 90210?
I was.
You watched it?
I watched it every week.
Who was his character?
He played Brandon.
Brandon, yeah.
Yeah, Brandon Walsh.
Yes.
And I think if you were a girl and you had a pulse in the 90s, you were watching 90210. I believe it was every Thursday night.
I remember watching some of it. I had sisters. That's the reason why I watched it, I'm sure. What about you, Erika? Did you ever see Beverly Hills 90210?
I've seen Beverly today in the south side of Chicago. That's as far as I can go with the Beverly. I have no idea about what is this
TV It was like a TV show from the 1990s.
I didn't grow up here.
Oh, so you missed it, which is not a bad thing.
What is it about? No,
it's like it was about teenagers growing up in Beverly Hills out in like near Hollywood, right?
Yeah, there
California.
Was a Minnesotan family relocated to Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
And it's Brenda and Brandon. Priestley plays Brandon.
Yeah.
Shannon Doherty played the sister.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look
they go into this Hollywood lifestyle.
This is in Wikipedia by any
chance? Yes,
sure.
of course.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it was a very, very popular show. It went for, I don't know how many years, but it went for a number of years.
A long time.
Aaron Spelling, I think, was the producer.
Yes.
He produced like a lot of famous shows.
Oh, yeah.
Successful shows.
Love Boat.
But it was just like a big thing popular with teens, mostly, I'd say.
I want to be a teenager again. Maybe I'll watch it again.
Don't we all?
I'll watch it.
So before we get started, what I like to do usually is just kind of go around the room and ask everyone to give like an opening comment to summarize your thoughts on the book or the short story. It's just a short story. The story can be found in a collection called Her Smoke Rose Up Forever, which is a pretty definitive collection for this author. It's got, I don't know if it's like 18 stories. I think it's like some of her best works that are collected there. I think she did publish 2 novels, but I think mostly she did short stories. So you can find it in other places as well, but that's where we all took it from. So just to kind of summarize your thoughts, and if you can, in just like a 1-sentence real quick impression of this story. So I'll start just to get things going. So I wrote mine out, so that's why it's going to sound so great. So I say, it's an epistolary narrative unraveled with increasing tension as terror reigns abomination with insect horror. That was my impression of the story. I'll go to you next, Amanda. Just like a 1-sentence quick summary of your thought on the story.
It is a science fiction cleansing of society.
Very, very nice, very fitting, very fitting. But you, Erika, just your general impression.
Well, I think it was interesting, but I also laugh a lot throughout the short story. I mean, maybe it's a bad thing to laugh. I found a lot of humor.
That's your reaction, yeah?
Yeah.
But it was kind of grotesque, right? Like morbid humor. And I really, what I capture, I really, while reading it, I capture her writing, the way she writes her prose was fantastic.
Absolutely.
From the writing perspective.
All right, good. I'll stop you there.
Very delightful.
Yeah, I'll stop you there. But that's like your impression. We can get kind of more into that in a little while. Again, we are covering the Screwfly solution. I'm going to go into the bio section of the podcast now. We'll just talk about the author. The author who wrote this story is named James Tiptree Jr. And James Tiptree Jr. was actually a woman who adopted a male name. Her real name is Alice Sheldon, and she kind of had a number of names throughout her life. She was born Alice Hastings Bradley. When she married, she became Alice Bradley Sheldon, and her most popular pen name was James Tiptree Jr., although at some point she did adopt another pen name, Raccoona Sheldon, which was a female name. She was a doctor, so she went by Dr. Alice Sheldon, and I think she even did some journalistic work when she went by Alice Davy. So she used a lot of names. She was big on using pen names. She was born August 24th, 1915, and she died May 19th, 1987. Growing up, her father was a successful lawyer, and her mother was a very successful writer. I believe her mother wrote children's books. The family was successful and privileged enough that they took safaris over to Africa. I think they went to the Congo, and I listened to a bunch of podcasts. And there's a biography about her. I'll try to look through my notes and put a link to this biography that came about her. I haven't read the biography, but I listened to some interviews with the biographer. It was pretty interesting. She had a very interesting life. So she grew up going to these African safaris. Her father actually, I believe, shot a mountain gorilla that ended up in one of the big natural history museums in New York. So it was probably a very exciting life to be able to do that. I think she was actually born in Chicago. She went to various privileged schools. I think at some point she went to the University of Chicago and other big places. But she had a privileged life, I'd say. She pursued visual arts for a little while, painting and graphic design. I think she only really had one. I think her works were exhibited, but she only really published one illustration. Her mother's agent published some cartoon or something that she did in a magazine. She got married twice. The first time she was still in school, and I was listening to another podcast talk about her, Galactic Suburbia. I'll put a link to them too, because they read the biography and they were talking about her. But they said is that her and her first husband, they didn't even realize when they were in school that when they got married, that disqualified them for being in school. This is how far back this was. So because they got married and they didn't think it through, and it sounded like the marriage was almost like a dare. It wasn't really thought through. So they got married and then they found out they had to leave school because of it. So the marriage, I don't think, was long-lived. She eventually gets divorced. She ends up enlisting in military service in World War II. I think she was in the Army first, and eventually she was very good at her job. It was more like a logistical job and what they let women do at the time. But she was, I think, dissatisfied with how the men treated her in the military and was able to move over to the Air Force and work, I think, in intelligence, which led her to meet her second husband. She got married to him, and they both ended up getting jobs in the CIA eventually. She worked in the CIA for a few years, ultimately leaving there to go back to school. But she did spend some time in the CIA. I forget if it was 3 years or 5 years. So that was a big feather in her cap. She was very, very smart. She did have an early publication, I think under her own name in The New Yorker, somewhere around that point. After she leaves the CIA, she goes back, gets her education. She got a degree, a PhD in experimental psychology, I believe. That was where she got her degree. So at some point, when she was growing up, I think in the north of Chicago, she read a lot of the early science fiction, the pulp magazines, if you've ever heard of them, like Conan the Barbarian. That was published in the old pulp science fiction magazines, which were disregarded for years. We covered Robert Howard and Conan, or not Conan, but we covered Robert Howard and another character he wrote about in an earlier podcast. H.P. Lovecraft, he was published in the pulps. This is the golden age of science fiction, early stuff. She grew up on that stuff and liked it. So later on in her life, when she's a lot older, she decides that she's going to try writing science fiction. And to do this, obviously at the time, there were women, I think, doing it, but it was a lot harder. And she ended up adopting this pen name, James Tiptree Jr. And the story behind it that I heard was that Tiptree is actually a jam, a marmalade. And I think she was shopping with her second husband and saw this Tiptree jam in the grocery store. And she's like, Tiptree, that'd be a good name for an author. And she was like, what about James Tiptree? And then her husband said, James Tiptree Jr. And then that's how she created the name. It ended up being very, very successful. And from what I could tell, people who looked into her biography is that she was able to sort of adopt this persona of this James Tiptree. And it really worked for her for expressing herself. She was very secretive about who she was, and no one knew for years. I think it was over 10 years before they figured out who she was. So James Tiptree started publishing, was very successful, started winning awards. This story itself won, I think we said, a Nebula Award, although it was nominated for a Hugo and a Locus Award as well. People were very impressed with James Tiptree, and there was speculation of who it was, and everyone, or well, not everyone, but most people thought it was a man. And some people, some other famous science fiction writers were like, it's absolutely a man. They were, certain it was. James Tiptree, Alice Sheldon, she would actually correspond with people, with fans, and a lot of other writers, like Ursula Guin, who we talked about, which we covered on this podcast previously on the Lathe of Heaven, Philip K. Dick, who this podcast has covered at least 3 times. So she was in correspondence with a lot of famous writers. They all respected her, but no one knew who she was. They just had her letters and stuff. Eventually, so what she was known for was kind of having elements of hard sci-fi, but also soft sci-fi. And hard sci-fi would be very science-based. Soft sci-fi would be more sociological, psychological. She's also associated with the New Wave movement, which was made popular by, your husband always talks to me about him. I just read a book by him too. That escapes me, but those were the movements. And the New Wave movement was sort of a rejection of like earlier sci-fi, like Tolkien and stuff, rejecting that, and it was darker, and it was like more experimental, more literary, more artistic. So she was known for taking inspiration for the early science fiction which she read, the pulpy stuff, and then taking a different direction. Her stories were known for being darker, filled with sex, violence, and also gender issues. Eventually, fast forwarding, after many years of success, her mother died, her mother who was a famous writer. So she published an obituary and mentioned that her mother was a famous writer. Somehow, a fan figured this out from the obituary that was published in the paper. And they figured out exactly who she was and outed her without, what she didn't want to be known for who she was. And I think it was like a big to-do in the science fiction community because most people thought she was a man. And she was very self-conscious about it. So she had established these relationships with other famous authors, published authors. And she wrote to some of them to say, I hope you're not mad at me, to find out that I'm not who you thought I was. And one of them, I think, who was a lesbian, forget what's her name, just escaped me, sort of encouraged her to leave her husband and go off with her and join a lesbian commune, I think. But by this time, there's a lot of speculation with James Tiptree and what her sexual orientation was. She was married twice, and she was married with his husband until her death. But I guess in some of her letters, she revealed that she had early kind of rebuffed attempts to be in experimenting with lesbianism and stuff with other women. And so she explored gender through her writing, but didn't feel that she could do it in her own personal life. And I think when she was approached by this other writer, she ends up kind of saying, well, I'm too old now, and I can't just change my life, Her biographer said that she thought that she was in love with her husband and had a pretty good relationship. Although we talked about this earlier, her husband was significantly older. We thought, 13 years older?
Right. Yeah.
13 years older. After she gets outed, at some point she also takes this other moniker, this other fake name, Raccoona Sheldon. And that's what this story, the Screwfly Solution, is published under that name, not James Tiptree Jr. And that's when she tried to write as a woman. But I guess that from what I could gather is that didn't really work with her. And I don't know if she really had much success publishing her own name. She really was successful using this fake name and this male persona. So, who knows if she really identified as a man or what. These were different times, different, social acceptabilities and stuff. But it's very interesting things. And in using that fake name and persona, she was able to explore themes. She suffered with emotional issues, I guess, and had contemplated suicide at various points in her life. I think she revealed that to friends. the reception by the scientific community when it came out of who she was, that she was really a woman and not this man, she was accepted, I think, generally by the other women writers, and I think some of the men, but some of the men, I think, kind of distanced themselves from her. I don't know if they outright said anything bad about her, but it just, she wasn't as warmly accepted by some of them. So eventually, she was a lifetime smoker, and I think her health started going down. Her husband, who was 13 years older, he had significant health problems. I know he was going blind, and he was described as an invalid at some point, but he had a lot of problems. And I guess her mother, at the end of her life, she might have had to care for. So apparently, she, through letters or whatnot, said that her and her husband had years ago, and maybe when they were in the war, they saw how life can be and the atrocity of life, and they had a suicide pact. And they supposedly had an agreement that they weren't going to, live their lives past the point where they could take care of themselves. And since her husband was older and had serious health problems, she saw his decline. She was starting to have health problems, although she was younger. I guess she didn't want to live her life like that. And the biographer, when she was interviewed, it's, from what she could tell, she thought that the husband probably wasn't too into this idea of the suicide pact, but ultimately probably agreed to it. And so one day, the date of her death, she shot her husband while he was in bed sleeping, and then called, I believe, his son to tell him what she had done. And then she called her lawyer to say what had done. And she had a suicide letter that she had written years earlier that was left. And then she shot herself. And that's how she ended her life. So a pretty tragic ending. Yeah. Before she died, she ended up writing, I think, 2 novels. I think her success critically sort of declined at the end of her life. So I don't know, you get the impression that she wasn't real happy. But she was very prolific with letters and correspondence, and I think all of her letters a fan ended up with them, and then they were donated to the University of Oregon. And that's where the biographer went and researched all this stuff and put it together. I'd like to read her biography. It sounds very interesting. Her life is interesting. After her death, her legacy, she's got a lot of award-winning stories. They created a award based out of discussions at a science fiction convention in Wisconsin, WisCon, that some people got together and decided to create the James Tiptree Jr. Award. And that award is given out every year to people who expand or explore our understanding of gender. So there's a whole award based on her. There was a couple quotes I saw on Wikipedia by people who were in the industry who knew her. I wanted to read 2 of them. The first was by Gardner Dozois, who actually died this year. He was a famous editor of science fiction magazine in science fiction. So he said, Sheldon was simply one of the best short story writers of our day. She has already had an enormous impact on upcoming generations of SF writers. Her footprints are all over cyberpunk turf. Cyberpunk is like another little subgenre of science fiction. Neuromancer, I think, is the big book there. And another quote by Ursula K. Le Guin was that Tiptree's work is proof of what she said, that men and women can and do speak both to and for one another, if they have bothered to learn how. So she made a big impact in the science fiction community, and her legacy is last. And so this collection is one example of that. That's kind of the overview of her life that I saw. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to add to that, or if that's good with you.
It's very interesting how she died.
Yeah.
There's a brutality to her writing.
Yeah.
And I find that...
And a darkness.
And a darkness to her morosity. And it's violent imagery, but it's interesting that she really had no qualms.
Yeah.
About even shooting her ailing husband, and then...
Oh, well, we don't know the struggle.
We don't know what happened, but that's what she said to the son, but it's
that is really... That's intense that she would... Yeah. She shot him, and then she called and to say, this is what I did. I'm assuming she did that because she wanted everyone to know this is what happened. She didn't want any misunderstanding.
Anyone second guessing. Yeah. And then she killed herself.
Yeah.
So when you said that, it clicked because I could see that undercurrent in her writing.
Yeah.
Just the random brutality of it. Yeah.
That's rough.
Yep.
It reminds me a little bit of Robert Howard, who wrote Conan the Barbarian. He also took his own life. He took his life when his mother, he had sort of an overbearing mother. He lived with his mother and father into his 30s, and his mother got a serious chronic illness and died. And the day she died, he went out to his car in the driveway and shot himself.
Wow.
And he was very young, very young.
Very tragic.
Tragic.
Yeah.
Most writers' lives, right? But, to be honest, I didn't explore her background until now that I'm listening to you. I kind of wanted to take a step back and just immerse myself in the reading and later on somehow learn about the author.
Absolutely, yeah.
I usually tend to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that authors, you know, I was just listening to some of the radio people talking about, you know, art and artists. At what point do you separate the artist from their art, you know? And it's a debatable thing.
It
you know?
is, yeah.
So it can be looked at on its own, but you can also look at it in context with the artist, you know? Something to think about.
Yeah.
So that's Alice Sheldon. With that, we can move on to the discussion of our story. So I'm going to see if I can try to come up with a synopsis of the story just to kind of set the context before we get into the discussion. So the story was The Screwfly Solution, and it was published originally in 1977, the year I was born.
The punk era.
Me too.
Published in Analog Science Fiction Science Fact magazine. So the story is sort of about an epidemic that sweeps the world, which causes violence in men against women, where they kill women and eventually then children. And then it's kind of alluded that then the human race is going to go away. It's told primarily through letters. It's an epistolary story. It's between a husband and wife mostly, and some narrative from them as well mixed in. The husband is down in South America researching solutions to parasite problems. There's parasites that I think are getting into...
For children, too.
For children and animals, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. He's researching the Kane fly and the spruce bud worm or something like that. And he's going back and forth with his wife that they miss each other. He's got a friend back home who's also a scientist who the wife is in contact with. The husband is Alan and the wife is Anne. Anne is sending letters to him saying how she is, how she misses him. But she's also letting him know that weird things are going on in the United States. Right. That all of a sudden, like, women are being killed off. And people are coming up with crazy justifications for it, religious justifications.
And just the geography, right? On how the...
and how it's kind of evolving. The horse latitudes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's also including articles from their friend Barney, who's at home with her. And Barney, I guess, is aware of this epidemic that's going around. And he's telling her to put these articles with her letters and send them back to Alan. So you also get these letters and these articles that give you sort of a wider world picture and also like scientific perspectives and like there's like a military account and stuff like that. Eventually the narrative leads with Alan deciding he needs to go back home because it's getting too crazy. On the way home, he suddenly realizes he has this disease or epidemic or virus.
It's revealed through a dream, I believe.
Yes, he has
while he's on the plane.
Exactly. Yep. He has a dream and he realizes he's fantasizing of killing his wife while he's also making love. Because that's the way this works, is that
the arousal.
It takes advantage of the sexual arousal in the male and causes the male to have a violent reaction and want to kill women. He eventually tells her, I can't come home. If I do come home, don't see me because I'll kill you.
Just get a gun.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the perspective changes. You get like a diary entry from the daughter who doesn't really quite understand what's going on. It's alluded that the husband and wife do get together and the wife realizes they can't hang out and she takes the daughter and goes away, but then the daughter sneaks back. The author doesn't go into great detail, but it's basically alluded that the husband kills the daughter because he's got this sickness and then he kills himself. And then the wife is only left and their friend Barney. The world is going completely upside down by now. They've figured out through, like you said, the horse latitudes that this disease is spreading from the tropical areas and going north. So the wife, Anne, has to flee north to Canada, I believe.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And she also mentioned she had a sister living in the south.
Yes.
The U.S. and Florida.
And friends and stuff like that. She's like in touch with her friends and hearing weird things. Yeah. So she eventually flees alone to Canada to get ahead of the disease. And she's like sort of surviving out in the wilderness and trying to disguise herself as a man so no one will attack her. And it's becoming harder and harder for her to do this, to survive, because I think she doesn't have like the right equipment and tools to like just survive. Because she's like, winter is coming. I'm not going to be able to survive the winter.
Yep.
And it's just very bleak. And then of course the ending. And I guess we'll get to the ending in a little bit. But that's the story in a nutshell. It's like, I don't know, 30 pages or something like that.
Yeah, about that.
It's not too long.
No.
It's I think it might have won for novelette. So that's like shorter than a novella, but longer than a short story. I wanted to ask you guys first, how did you like the format of the story? Because it's I mean, this is sort of a technical question, but it's written in epistolary format. It's through letters. I think Frankenstein might be written that way. But, there are obviously other famous stories that are written that way.
Yeah.
How did that come across to you guys reading the articles? I'll go to you first, Erika.
I think it was interesting because in the story, what I didn't get is that I usually expect this character development, but since it's different kind of format, through letters, I think it's a way that she exposes each person, and in the letters, they get developed in a way psychologically much better. And in such, we're talking about 30 pages, and she really did a lot in those 30 pages.
You are right. I thought about that myself. I felt like
absolutely.
The story sort of starts real personal with the letters, the husband and wife. Then it gets really wide. You see what's going on with the whole world. Yeah. And then it gets personal again. It zooms back in.
Well, I tend to like this kind of the short stories. I'm a big fan of John Dos Passos. He's an American writer, and he used to write like in newsreels. And I find that very interesting from the writing perspective.
How did it hit you, reading the letters?
I thought it was very,
Amanda.
The pulse was on the voice of what was going on. It was very present tense. When you're writing a letter, it's obviously very personal, and you were immediately pulled into the story because there's a personal relationship between the two characters through their voices in the letters. So that was very riveting. That type of writing is riveting to me. What I also loved was the news clippings of what was happening in the world and kind of the juxtapositioning of the letters with the news stories of the epidemics and the violence and the religious cults. I thought that was beautifully woven.
It gives everything context.
Yes, it gives context. And then, as you said, the greater net of casting out more of what was going on in the world. The world went to pot, and then it went personal again in a sphere of her escaping and just her demise eventually. Yeah. And the world dying out. So that was extremely poignant to me, the way it was written, that first voice form.
You know what is interesting? A letter is something you have to write, but you in theory, you're writing it, you have at least a little bit of time to reflect on what you're going to say.
Right.
So you don't generally just like blurt out stuff. You got a minute to like put stuff down, So that's what these thoughts are. But she also includes sort of seamlessly some narrative, just straight narrative from the characters' heads and reflections. And it just kind of like flows through like letter, clipping, and then you get inside people's heads.
And not only that, she describes where they are, what they see.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it, even though it's like a letter format, like in a letter format, it's almost like removed, like you would think less immediate, because this was a letter that got sent, that got mailed, that got read, right? It's not like this is happening now. It's like this is what is happening now, but you're going to read it later.
Right.
But yet, you lose yourself in reading this. You don't feel any distance. You feel the tension building when they're talking about the latitudes, the disease moving.
There's a moment she mentions that, that to build suspense. Oh, by the way, your 3 letters arrived, 3 of them. Yeah. Right?
They didn't get to her right away.
Yeah. So
they all came at once.
It kind of takes you back of how it used to be back in the days, right? That feeling. Reflecting the emotion of receiving some news, special news from someone, from a loved one.
I like the description where Anne says, "I took your letter, Alan's letters,
clipped them around,
put them around the house, so I feel less lonely."
Yeah,
I was like, I can picture that.
Totally.
Yeah, that was really good. Another interesting thing is that she switches the point of view through the use of the letters. You get Alan's point of view. Then you get Anne's, but then you get this like diary entry from Amy. So you get Amy's point of view. It's kind of through Anne, and then you get these other points of view through the articles, through the military. I think a lot of times nowadays when you read something and the point of view switches, there might be like an asterisk to let you know this is a new point of view. And there was a couple of spots where those were. But because she's switching back between the articles and then actual narrative, I think she kind of sets off the new point of view. And I guess what I'm saying is she did it very expertly. You didn't get lost in who was talking, even though it wasn't one person the whole time. You're getting a couple people, different perspectives. but you just kind of get lost in it, and you know who's talking. You're not confused.
Right.
I mean, if you're not if it's the first time reading such a format of a short story, you might get a bit DC, you know? But you don't read stories like that every day either. You know?
No.
It's very rich.
Yeah.
It was a crisp and clean voice of a writer. Sometimes, as Erika said, you get muddled in the storyline because there's too much going on with viewpoints and characters.
Sure.
She was a crisp writer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Her writing is a tapestry of emotion.
Yeah.
And vividness. That's how you can tell who the character is because there's no mistaking their voice through this revolutionary idea of letter writing. That takes a lot of genius as a writer to shift into that craft. And that's what I valued is there's no mistaking who these characters are through a first person voice. Right. And that was she's just so skillful with that. And not everyone is.
True.
It's today you get a lot of muddled storylines that make no sense. Your editor's supposed to help you, but I bet you that maybe it didn't have to be that edited because it sounds like she was right on it. With
it does
voice.
seem that way. Who knows? Maybe the magazine editor. We don't know. What
That's
they did,
a supposition, but I feel like she was very
Another
clear.
question. I would like to know who she read.
Well, she started off reading the pulp stuff, so that would have been like the early sci-fi stuff.
Okay.
Like I'm trying to think of. I don't know what authors she read offhand. Yeah, it's probably in her biography. But it sounds like
her influences mainly,
right?
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I think she
like we all do as writers.
Yeah,
pick on someone or
an influence. Yeah,
I mean, unconsciously or consciously.
Yeah. I liked the account by the military guy about this incident that happens at the base.
Yeah.
Where you see, they're going to investigate, I guess, all these deaths. And they bring a female scientist who's an epidemiologist.
Dr. Faye?
Yeah, Dr. Faye.
Yes, she is, yeah.
And immediately there's a problem because she's a woman. They're like, she can't come out and investigate. And she's like, I'm here to do research, I think, for the government. But they tell her, I think they try to say it's too dangerous or something. So, like, you have to stay here. And then it gets just really creepy and really awful. And she manages to really give you the horror of what goes on without giving you play-by-play.
And also the hierarchy, right? Because she shows not only whatever men, but men with some certain power in society. Like the mayor is the one that kills, not whatever soldier or whomever police agent is the mayor.
The mayor who kills the doctor,
Yeah, and who influences the rest of the... Well,
I think by that time in the world, they talk about these liberated zones and this cult for the Sons of Adam or something. Right. And I think it's alluded that like now this cult or these people have like sort of gone into this area. So the mayor is under the spell, of this disease. But I saw someone said it's like a rational construction. It was some other article about this, or maybe it was in Wikipedia. Where people are diseased. They have a virus or some problem that's chemical based. But they're coming up with rationalizations on why they feel this way. And so they create these cults. They create this, religious reasons. Right. That's sort of overtaken this area. And that's how you get this mayor who's now like calling the shots over the military, over the government scientist who's come to investigate it.
Yeah. And now if you think about, this was published or written in 77 when it's a big time for a lot of cults, right?
Yeah. Jonestown.
Was
happening.
So, if you put that together, right? Yeah. She's been influenced by a present time, right
there. Spiritual purging, but also...
And we have the Osho cult.
Yeah, and that's the thing also, what I thought is that an angel was speaking to them. There was an angel.
That's what they start to say.
And the angel was telling them what to do.
Yeah.
So that, to me, brought it all home. Because it's like, okay, what gets in, you wonder, what gets in people's minds? And there's irrational thoughts, and just that those cults and the radicalism of these radical religious thoughts and the purging of everything and the violence,
It's very depressing because it makes you think like people will just find ways to justify anything.
Murder and genocide.
And she's talking about, she's like, all these murders are going around and no one's doing anything.
Exactly.
And they're just trying to brush it under the rug.
Yep.
And she also showing through her short story, she shows how the government is behind, or to a certain extent, someone that's behind the scene, but I have it on the
like pulling the strings, kind of like a puppet master, or like
orchestrating.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So
facilitating.
Right. Like Jonestown, and then you have the senator.
Oh yeah, senator
being
went
killed. So I see a lot of flashbacks. From that like correlation.
Right. The cult aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of how someone can deem themselves a savior, but really you are demonic.
And I'm
because
sure
you're with God. Your mind is with God and the angels are talking to you.
So everyone needs to listen to you.
So everyone needs to listen to me, but I'm murdering people left and right.
And I bet that had a lot of an impact on her. It shook her up, I have to say, because
I don't know when Jonestown was it?
77, 78-ish.
It is? Okay.
Yeah, something like that. When that went down, and then the senator was murdered, and they found everyone drank the Kool-Aid, and it was cyanide poisoning, and they all died.
Yeah.
And people were like, that's a horror of a cult. And there have been many cults after that, Hale Bop.
But, she gets into the scientist in the story. I think Barney might be the one who points out, as saying, like, that's the problem. People are thinking the cults are the problem, but that the cult is the symptom of what's going on.
Yes.
And she's like, that's how, like, people are just not understanding what's going on. There's a biological problem, but they're thinking the cults are the problem.
And here the interesting thing is that she mashes all these up, politics and religion, and then science.
So, yes,
and psychology of people, how they react in moments, in situations. So it's really, she did a lot.
All in a short story.
30 pages.
30 pages.
And the biology, it's interesting, like the Screwfly, I looked up, Screwfly that's a real thing. It was a real pest that was affecting cattle, causing huge amounts of money of damage, where these Screwflies, like the maggots of them, I guess, they had like a screw shape to them. And I guess a lot of flies will eat dead flesh, but these particular ones will go into live flesh.
Oh, wow.
And so, and a lot of, animals can't deal with that. Like humans could pull things out and stuff like that, but animals can't. So it was a real problem. And they had to do this sterile insect solution where scientists, I guess, irradiated a bunch of the male Screwflies and then released them back into the world so that when the female Screwflies mated with them, they wouldn't have any babies. And they were able to really reduce or eliminate the population. So that was like a real thing that she based this on.
I will describe a word for a word to kind of put it in one word. She's very raw.
Yes.
In a way that she makes you be aware of nature, that how we connected to nature, right? If insects can be in a program or in a lab, how they react to whatever.
Yeah.
And then how we can impact nature and how that comes back to us, right? So there's a reflection about ecological reflection here.
Yeah.
And then the main character, one of the, Anne? Then she's by herself, right? In the cold, up in the north, in Canada, makes you think of Neanderthal times.
Right.
Yeah. Everything is kind of devolving into...
Yeah, and raw. Going back again to that war. There's
no more civilized society at that point.
Savage.
She's alone. She's relying on her primitive instincts to get through this horrendous... She's the last woman on Earth, basically.
Or she thinks.
She thinks she is. And she's running out of matches. There's no heat. She's going to go.
And then towards the end, she reveals this mysticism too. Because these aliens.
Yeah, let's talk about the ending. So it's revealed. It's actually very cleverly revealed because it starts off with the husband researching these insects and how they're going to mess with the insects to eliminate the parasites, the insects. And then at the end, she sees aliens. And we realized that people, when they said they were seeing angels, were really seeing aliens.
Absolutely. Yeah.
These weird aliens. And then she finally puts it together that it was aliens doing the same thing that humans were doing to insects, and that the aliens in order to take over our planet, they weren't going to just bomb us and shoot us and fight with us. They were going to introduce some kind of biological warfare that was going to cause us to kill ourselves by affecting the men. Just like how her husband was trying to, mess with the cane flies. Mm-hmm. That way the humans would be gone, but the planet would still be good and livable.
Yeah. They could colonize.
There's just this like hopelessness to it.
Yeah.
Fatalism to it. Like there's nothing she can do at the end. She just gets the knowledge that like we're doomed.
It's very pertinent to the times today. I think that, when I was reading the ending, I'm like, look at the world around us right now with the killing of oceans and deforestation and what's happening to our earth with pollution. Where are we going to be in 50, 80 years?
And actually the Me Too movement.
Me Too.
So
just with the men and the violence towards women.
I will call this an evergreen kind of short story.
An evergreen?
Yeah.
Like it's relevant for...
Absolutely.
Today's time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at least, if not all of the contents and all the elements, she includes them, but many of them are totally evergreen.
I think that the aliens represent a greater good, too. Or maybe I don't know, there could be a sinister quality to the ending, but I also think that it's about, let's get back to where we just need to wipe the slate clean. We need to get back to where we
But there's no, judgment. We don't know the aliens' perspective.
We don't know.
We don't know, it's not like the aliens are coming here to clean up the planet. I mean, it's not, we don't know that.
They just killed off the humanity.
And we don't know if they're just doing it in a benign way, just so they can live here.
Right.
Just for their own selfishness or...
That was unclear to me, why that was going on, but to me...
Well, what about the last line? Erika, you brought... What's the last line?
Yeah.
All I see is a real estate agent.
Real estate agent.
Yes.
And it's almost tongue-in-cheek, humorous.
Absolutely.
I mean, she is saying that the aliens, that's a real estate agent for the aliens. Okay, we're clear in this area so we can move in and move a house here.
Yeah.
And to me, that implied that the aliens are just planning on moving here. And they just want to clear us out so that they can live here.
Yeah.
And that was their motive, at least from her perspective, from Anne's perspective.
Right.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but that there's ecological implications and whatnot. Another interesting thing is that she didn't write this story under her name, under the fake name James Tiptree Jr., which was her more popular name. From what I gathered in some of the interviews is that she took up this other fake name, Raccoona Sheldon. She probably took this up before she got outed. And I think it was at this point she was engaging in correspondence with other female writers in the science fiction community, and that maybe she might have felt that she was more in touch with some of the feminist movements that were going on, and she felt like she wanted to try writing something and putting it in a woman's name and not just a man's name. But she still didn't do her own name.
Yeah, also, let's talk about that, the feminist movement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's reflected here.
So she didn't use a male name to write the story. She used the female fake name, Raccoona. So, what do you guys think about that?
It's interesting because in the beginning of this, you were talking about how maybe when she was writing as James Tiptree Jr., she felt a little differently than when she was writing under Raccoona. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's an interesting revelation. With the Raccoona part, maybe she was trying to find her own voice as a woman and a writer. But as the James Tiptree Jr. part, she was breaking in and she didn't want to be discovered. Yeah. She didn't want people to know she was a woman writing because she would have been perceived differently. Yeah. So maybe this Raccoona name was her saying, okay, now I want to be taken seriously as a woman writer. It was later, it was 1977 maybe. Women writers were more prevalent.
And not only that, woman
genre.
Writers in the sci-fi.
Yep.
How about, how will that, if she had her real name published, I wonder if that will sold as well as if did.
Exactly.
As in a male.
Right, yeah, right. I'm sure that's, or that must have been a consideration when she took the male name.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Did you guys see this?
That was pretty smart.
There's a lot. This whole story is violence against women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
From start to finish, pretty much. How did that hit you guys?
Not well.
You gals, I should say.
Not well. I've got to say it. it didn't sit well with me.
Mm-hmm.
The brutality of the men, the rapes,
Mm-hmm.
the murders, and also the aggression when the male became sexually aroused. And the women, there's one part where women's heads just get snapped, their necks get snapped. There's that scene.
Well, that's the film, though.
That's the film. We're not there yet, but I feel like there's a lot of violence against women and just, they're nothing. They're just like being wiped out left and right. And I identified with that because I'm like, what if I were living like this? What if I have girl children?
Mm-hmm.
What if I was killed in the streets and my girls were killed along with me? How would I feel? How would I feel as prey in society? And it really resonated with me.
Yeah. Is that what you guys are saying? Like it has relevance today?
I think so.
Well, I mean, it has also maybe a political message behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, the world is going through so much persecution of certain groups of people of whatever variation of nationalities, including nowadays in the U.S. even, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you don't have whatever papers or the rights to live legally in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're being persecuted in a way. So it's this alienation.
Yes. And I think women are still being...
Yeah.
And families are being separated. That's brutality.
And that happens here. I mean, the family unit is broken up. I mean, that quote I read, she talks about she used to always think of we as a family, and in the end she's just thinking we as a women.
The alienation is present. I mean, maybe the I don't know her background, mainly, I mean, her family history. Who knows where her family comes from? Maybe that has relevance, right, to a certain point.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's the persecution issue here.
Absolutely.
And also it's linked through religion, which is another interesting element here.
But what about, because you guys
a cult.
But what about the fact that it's supposedly based on, like, I mean, at the end, the sci-fi element is the aliens. So we find out that aliens have been causing this. And I guess it's not just a social movement.
It's not a chemical.
Well, it's a chemical, it's a biological warfare. Almost.
Yeah, it is.
Right? So,
that's done in this, in the world. I mean, times. HIV and all that, I'm sure that has a lot to do. I mean, wasn't created in a vacuum, or the Ebola and whatever other diseases. I mean, cancer is not, there's no cure for cancer, and we're in 2018.
Well, does that excuse the violence that's going on? Because it's from aliens introducing this, like, it's almost like a pest control, it's a biological warfare element. How does that contextualize the violence at the end when you find out where it's supposedly from?
If it's justified, you mean?
Well, I'm not going to say it's justified. I'm not going to say it's justified, right? But how does it contextualize? How do you perceive the violence when you discover it wasn't just religious cults trying to get people to do this, that there was actually something behind that? There was this biological component.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if I want to say it excuses the violence, because how do you excuse it? But does it undercut the violence? Does it lessen it? Does it make you think it's not as bad?
Not to me. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I just think that it's still extremely disturbing, whether it was biological or not. I mean, obviously, these men couldn't control their impulses due to the biological warfare. However, it is still monumentally disturbing.
I mean, it kind of, to be honest, it really shook me up.
Oh, yeah.
Because I am from Argentina, and nowadays, every day, there's a femicide being done, literally. There are a lot of men, and there are a lot of that do horrific things to women, to little kids. They are being disappeared, kidnapped, violated, and murder. And we don't have a justice system that backs them up.
Yep.
And these men are free, and there's no justice for these families, the family of these women that are being killed every day. And that happens in Chile. That happens in Honduras, in Central America. Every day there's brutality in Mexico. Las mujeres de Juárez, per se. Another example. Women are nothing.
They're not considered even worth living.
So it's really relevant.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it doesn't matter why the violence is occurring. It's still horrible violence.
Dead bodies and parts, mutilated bodies are being piled up in morgues or not even found.
There's a part of this story where they say we will no longer accept female corpses, and there's another part where they reveal that corpses are filling up the oceans and nets.
It's getting too clogged.
And this is happening.
Yeah,
Look at that. She even mentions India here, right?
Yeah.
India being collapsed with, the river of dead bodies floating.
Right.
And if you really think about it, India is a huge issue nowadays. There's a gang rape going on, and they're trying to fight for it every day in that country.
Very hard to there.
So it really shook me up because it's something that's going on. It's not that far from the reality.
Well, sometimes people say that, and we read a book on this podcast called Roadside Picnic that was by Russian authors. And one of the things I think we talked about on that podcast is that because those authors were writing sci-fi, they were not censored, or censored a lot less than if they would have overtly wrote political things.
Yeah.
I think science fiction and other genres like
allows
fantasy
you to kind of explore.
Yes.
It's a viable way of telling what's going on.
But there's a more horrific reality here. Like, there could be a biological pathogen that could be introduced into society that makes people go haywire or eradicates people. And that part of the argument, too, is extremely alarming, because I think that as we live in a very charged society politically, of actions that our leaders do that maybe we don't have control over and that are radical, this could happen. You know, as I was reading this, that's what I was thinking as well, is like, what if this was a reality? Where, like, and that's what sci-fi kind of does, I think. It makes you think of alternate realities that could perhaps happen or are imminent in the future, maybe.
We read on this podcast also 1984.
Yes, Orwell.
Yeah, or Erika's husband, Doyle, John Doyle, was on that episode. And I know sales from that book, went up recently. And it seems like that book is constantly getting renewed in new generations as being relevant. I mean, you had the elements of Big Brother and stuff that, came true more or less in different ways.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I read about her, and I mentioned this briefly, is that she did different things and new things in the genre. She's part of the new wave movement, but she was also inspired by classic science fiction. And I feel like classic science fiction does this. It says, here's how horrible things can get.
Right.
And, woe is you. Like be wary of what can happen. Yeah. And that's not necessarily groundbreaking science fiction to do that. Like, that is like sort of a trope of science fiction to say, here's what can happen. But she does it in her own way.
Right.
And with her own slant, it's a little darker. She's exploring gender and these sociological issues. And those are all unique to her. I mean, how do you guys feel about this story, knowing that it's written by a woman? Would you read this story differently if it was written by a man?
It's a good question.
Very good. I don't know.
I mean, like, Erika, you said you didn't, look up about her.
No.
But if you found out that it was a man after you read it, would that change your take on it? I mean, I'm guessing the violence would be just as disturbing. Yeah. But would it be more disturbing? Or I don't know. I mean...
Probably.
I would say it. Yeah, I agree.
Add a factor. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you will think, what's going on with this author? I mean, if I usually, like I said, I try to separate the author's whatever private life and from the art of itself, right? The artwork itself. I think it's a healthy way to approach an artist on any kind of area, whatever discipline, right?
Sure.
So, I don't take it as a personal thing. I don't believe there's a feminist literature or a masculine literature. There's a lot of that talk. That, the feminine, movement in literature. I don't know how to really, I had to wrap my head around that because I'm trying to, like I said, admire or read. And if I like an author and I like the way he or she writes, I try not to get wrapped up in that. In a way to take distance from and still appreciate it from a different standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I do think maybe that sometimes if it is a male author and it portrays violence against women, there are people that review books that say this was very misogynistic.
Mm-hmm.
They say these things in the media.
Mm-hmm.
I think writing is writing. I think no matter whether the writer is male or female, violence is still violence, and it gets you thinking about society. And I would not condemn a male writer if they wrote about that. I'd wonder, okay, what is the violence speaking to in the book? What is the symbolism of the violence?
What's the purpose of it in
the story? Or the purpose in
the
story. I don't think about that necessarily when I'm reading a male or female writer, but the graphicness of it, whether it's male or female, is still very prevalent.
But I mean, you have authors like, Charles Bukowski back in the days, or Henry Miller.
Yep.
And they're well known for, being very, like you said, like
misogynistic.
Yes, I mean, in a way. I mean,
Bukowski's got a book called Women, right?
Yeah, yes. But I mean, maybe his poetry, can be a little. He's one of my favorite authors. Besides of whatever, some of his poetry or prose or whatever can come across like being a little bit like. But it's in a different time. I don't know if I'm trying to justify that because I really admire the craft.
Absolutely.
But I mean,
but he's like raw too, right?
He's really raw.
Really
and
raw.
Then you read Henry Miller and you're like, whoa, man, really, he's so effective in a way that he's so raw and dirty, right?
Yeah.
In a way that he wants you to puke. And that's what I call effective, right?
Absolutely. Sensory, getting all those senses in there,
All the senses, all the wounds open right there. And that was his way of writing. And I wouldn't call that like, what a dirty old man, or I just admire. And at the same time, you had to really write that way. That's a talent. So
there's different. I mean, I guess as readers, we all have different sensitivities and sensibilities of what we like to read or not. And some people might not want to read stuff like that, and that's fine.
I mean, Henry Miller came. He wrote erotica straight up.
Absolutely, yeah.
And and he will go back and forth, sending letters to this other lady. What is her name? I forgot.
Anais Nin.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're really the pioneers of that genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are people that are not really into that kind of writing because of whatever their, limits are or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But when I read an author, I try to be as much as open-minded as I can be.
Right.
Mm.
And as a reader, when you're reading violence against women, it's triggering. You get triggered. But I think that when an author triggers you, it kind of gets you thinking about things more. And that's what I value about being triggered, is like, what's going on with this writer that's triggering?
Mm-hmm.
And what is that implication for me and greater society?
Mm-hmm.
How can I apply this to my life?
Well, I think... I feel the question is like, is it pointless? Are they just triggering you just to trigger you?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it serving the story?
It's serving the story.
Right.
Obviously, it's driving the story.
But sometimes I think if it's bad writing, it doesn't serve the story.
No.
It could just be trash.
Whatever.
Yeah, for no purpose.
No, to be honest, it reminded me a little bit of the Lathe. I don't know if you... a little bit of... it's a short story as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And...
what's it called?
The Lottery.
The Lottery.
Oh, the Lottery. Oh, that's by
Shirley Jackson.
Yeah,
Shirley Jackson.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Yeah.
So another very short story, but it really stays with you. I mean, I read that once,
and I don't think the violence in this is like pointless or whatever. And I mean, it's very visceral.
But
and there's a lot of sex in this.
Her short stories also justify.
Yeah.
Right towards the end, like. Okay.
Right. This is why this happened.
You don't question things. These things happen because it's the way it should happen, right? like in society. This is the way it works.
In
like,
the lottery you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, in a way, is to normalize things, right? Like nowadays, okay, we have Trump. Let's normalize that, right?
Well, and that's what happens in this story, is they normalize the violence.
We're
normalize
it's
getting
okay.
rid of immigrants. Yeah, let's normalize
separating families and terrorizing people.
Yeah.
So
There is a normalization in a lot of history.
Yeah.
Like if you think
That's her social commentary in this story, is how they rationalize and normalize the violence.
Look
The
at
governments, the
Hitler.
institutions,
Yep.
the...
Nazis, you know, the people of Germany
Yeah.
thinking that, oh, we're going to round up all these people
I mean,
and put them in camps, and that's okay.
Syria just happened. That's another genocide,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
happening. And
Chemical warfare.
There's refugee camps.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys feel at the end, when the alien is revealed, or the aliens are revealed, did you feel that was cheap at all? Or did you feel like it worked?
I liked it. I don't know. There was something
I
about
think,
it that I didn't feel was cheap.
Going back to, again, she added this mysticism. That's what I liked.
Yes.
You know, she wrapped it up in a really effective way.
And it wasn't trite. It wasn't corny. It was
No.
profound the way she did it. It was all, there was like, almost like
And just that expression,
beauty
a
to
real
it.
state.
Yeah.
The way she put it.
that irony.
Absolutely.
It was-
Like, I want to explore, I want to bring back that humor. There's a,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's humor in horror. People often play with
there's
horror and
dark
humor.
humor
Yes.
here.
Yes.
Absolutely. There's dark humor.
I did find that facetious. That line kind of had me chuckling at
I mean,
the
and you
end.
need that for a short story. You need that kind of like punch ending. I
At
mean,
the end, yeah.
She nailed every aspect and so many elements here. I can.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, why don't we wrap things up with the story?
Mm-hmm.
We still got to get into the film. So I'll just go around and ask you what your star rating out of 5 stars, how many you would give this story, and any final comments you want to add. Who wants to go first? Amanda, you want to go first?
I'd say 4.5.
4.5.
4.5 stars. I truly enjoyed this tale, even though I found it highly disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get through that and see a microcosm of society and current events that are going on in the story now. I think the author is brilliant in the writing, and it's a good read for the thought-provoking process of larger values in society today. Yeah.
Cool. Erika, what about you? Out of 5 stars, how many would you give it?
I will give to her 4.95.
4.95.
Or 4.93 maybe.
Okay.
A little bit away from 5. Yeah.
Almost perfect. Almost nearly perfect.
I cannot, yeah.
So let me ask you,
Nothing is perfect.
why
No.
is that why you won't give her perfect? Just because nothing is perfect?
That's right.
Would you give the lottery 5 stars?
That's a
yes.
tough.
You would.
You would, yeah.
I
I'd
like-
say 5.
Yeah, that's really well done.
Okay.
I mean, this is super well done. I mean, super achieved.
Gotcha.
What else can I add? Well, I just want to thank you mainly here for making me your guest in your program.
Absolutely.
And for introducing me to this kind of genre, because it's not because I'm against of it. It's just because, sometimes you don't get around things, right?
Yeah.
Or you do, like I'm sure I read some other sci-fi authors, but like I say, I try to not really think when I'm reading something, I'm not trying to really put any kind of parameters. I read signs or everything. That's important to read signs while you're driving and stuff. I read everything.
You're just looking for good stuff.
I want to thank you,
Yes,
and really, because you really opened the doors here, and it added this to my list of things to read in the summertime of 2018, because this will be published in 2 years, I think. And
We'll see.
and then I want to thank the Chicago Public Library.
Absolutely.
Go and thank your librarians, because
Yes.
they're almost on the verge of extinction.
Yes.
And that's not any mysticism or anything, because I acquired this book through the Chicago Public Library.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Speaking
libraries are
of
great.
eradication.
So support your libraries.
Yeah.
And I agree. Thank you for including me in this process. And this is not a book I would have read on my own, but I do appreciate its exposure.
Well, I think it's fun to try to find new stuff. That's one of the things I like about this podcast is I try to find stories or films that I've heard are good, or an author or director that are good, that I like doing it ones that I don't know anything about. Like, I've heard of James C. Tiptree Jr. I knew there's an award, and I was like, I don't think I've ever read anything by it. I want to just check it out. And I kind of went into this blind, and you can sometimes find really good stuff. So thank you for thanking me. I'm going to give this, you guys are making me up my rating, because, and that happens sometimes in these, when we have like really good discussion, it really makes you.
The wine helps.
The wine helps. The wine, yes.
And I don't know what happened this time. You really nailed it. I mean, it's
everyone's erudite with wine, right? You turn very wise, yeah.
But I'm gonna go 4.5 stars as well, like Amanda. It's a really great story. I recommend it.
I should go for the same then. I don't want to be left out.
You can go with whatever you want.
I feel the special one then. You
don't have to go down. I like your answer.
4.5. Can I change my mind?
That's okay. The peer pressure.
I want to be like you guys.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
4.98 is great.
Yeah.
9.5.
Or 9.3 or whatever it was.
Yes, that's
4.93.
So I appreciate that, and I'm glad to have shared this with you guys and get your perspective. I'm going to add that the story is actually available for free in a podcast format, a podcast I've listened to called Pseudopod, which is more horror stories. I think, Erika, you had a chance to listen to it today.
I have to really admit that I fall asleep in the middle of it because I was
But that's because you were laying out in the sun all day.
Yeah, and then my husband was driving us back home and I fall asleep in the middle. But, actually, it's good. I mean, it's stuff that I already read.
Yeah.
But it was really well done.
I liked it because they used different narrators for the different letters and stuff. So it's only an hour long. So you can find it on their website. I confessed
that to you, but actually my husband told you about it, right?
Yeah, he did.
That's really not
So nice. I'll try to put a link on the website to that. So if you want to just check out this story, you can just listen to it on Pseudopod. I did check out a couple other stories in this book. Some of them I also found available in podcasts. Clark's World is another science fiction magazine. They have Her Smoke Rolls Up Forever. They also have The Man Who Walked Home. Lightspeed Podcast, they had Love is the Plan is Death. I really, really liked that story because I wanted to check out a couple other stories. I think I read a couple more too, but I didn't read all of them.
Are those in the podcasts? Audiobooks?
Those are all in audiobook format podcasts for free. You can just listen to. I would love to
listen to
that one. I really recommend. Love is the Plan is Death.
So I just go to the link.
Yeah, I can give you the link. I'll put it on the website.
Great.
I want to read more of her stories. I really liked that one. I really like that one a lot. And I got to read more stuff by her because she's really good. So other than that, I'm going to wrap things up and just tell people to go to our website, which is www.nodeodorant.com, where you can write reviews of the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. It's available on iTunes, Apple Podcast. It's also available on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. The episodes are usually available on YouTube as well. So we recommend that you go there, check out the podcast, write reviews, and support it. That's pretty much it. So tune in later in the month when we're going to cover the film version of the Screwfly solution, directed by Joe Dante and starring Jason Priestley. So until then, I'll have everyone say good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Nice to meet you. If I'll meet you one day. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for listening.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode, or to read our show notes and find us on social media, visit nodeodorant.com. For more information on Ryan Sean O'Reilly and his various works of fiction, visit ryanseanoreilly.com. The theme music for this podcast was written by John Doyle from the band I Decline. You can visit him at i-decline.com. Voiceover for this podcast was provided by me, Margaret O'Reilly. Well, that concludes our episode. We hope you've learned a lot. Again, thanks for listening to our show. And always, always remember, there is no deodorant in outer space.
Okay, test. 1, 2, test, 1, 2, test. All right, let me hear you, Amanda.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, Erika.
Test 1, 2. Testicles there too.
Okay. All right, is everyone comfortable? It's not too loud in your ears. It could go a little lower or what?
I'm good.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I hear my cat.
Is that a cat in the background?
Sounds like a cat. Yeah. Want to contribute?
I hope it's not an alien. Well, let's leave that up to Al. Alf? What is it? Alf?
Elf.
Who used to eat cat?
Oh, is it maybe the basement door's closed?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll open the door.
So, please.
Maybe
The cat in.
They'll want to eat, though.
See what happens with the cat. Yeah.
All right. The cat's out of the bag.
Mm-hmm.